All right, Jules, when people think about the words diversity, equity, inclusion, and of course, now that those become ridiculously labeled as the dirty words, whatever, they tend to think about the workplace, college, university life, as in, they don't often necessarily think about healthcare, like receiving healthcare, like working in the healthcare field. History has shown us that, especially in the Black community, healthcare is kind of a sketchy thing. We saw in COVID, there were a lot of Black folk who were skeptical of the shot, the vaccination, reaching back to, when you ask them, the Tuskegee medical trials. And if you don't know what that is, that was when almost 400 Black men were brought in for a, quote, study on what was considered bad blood. And they were thinking that they were being treated. They were thinking that they were figuring out what's happening. They thought there was this control group and then the group that, so they're thinking they're all involved in a study and learning. Come to find out, no, they just wanted to see what it was doing to you. You weren't getting treated.
Yeah, let's be clear. They were lied to.
They were lied to. They weren't being treated at all. There was no study going on. It was literally just using Black men, in essence, as lab rats, just to see, just out of curiosity. And that's some BS. So when you have that in the back burner constantly, you become skeptical. I don't want to go see that doctor. What are they going to tell me? And this and that and the other, or all kinds of different situations. You got a situation where you don't necessarily you don't see yourself in your medical professional. Your medical professional doesn't see themselves in you. So many things. Going to medical school, the cost associated with that, how generational wealth or lack thereof affects your ability to think about those terms. So all of this stuff is real. And even the most recent one, and then I'll stop my diatribe, General Austin Lloyd, right? Our Secretary of Defense, just went through prostate cancer surgery. Didn't tell the White House, and I'm not trying to get political, but this whole situation. He comes out and explains that he realizes that he failed in that regard of not telling the White House what was going on. But what I listened to even more was, it wasn't just his duty to inform the White House and the American people. It was his duty, and he said it himself, to inform the American people. Why? Because as a Black man, Black men need to know, go get your prostate checked out, because there could be issues. And the fact that he kept it in, he even said, he's like, I played into our own issues instead of coming out and saying, this is what's going on, go see your doctor. So all of these things.
I feel that. I mean, you said that, and I feel that. I mean, regardless of position, we have a Black man who still at his core did not have the trust.
Right.
Perhaps, right? I mean, I don't want to put words into his mouth, but, Reish, to your point too, this isn't just something like that example just happened. Yep. And this is not, when we're talking about inequities in healthcare, we're not talking about hundreds of years ago.
Nope.
We're talking about right now. And, I have a personal story related to the Tuskegee medical trials. You can see I'm a white girl, grew up in a white community. And at one point, I was a volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association. I went on to serve on the board for seven years. But in the very beginning, I was a volunteer, and I was giving volunteer presentations. And just to educate people, these were things like how to recognize the top 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's. And the Black community, the Latino community, highly affected by Alzheimer's and other dementias. And so a lot of this work I was doing was going into community centers for free, into churches, to talk about the 10 signs. And so here I am, oftentimes in Black churches, walking in, as white girl Julie, to have these conversations. And I remember, and I so appreciated this conversation, I remember one of the first times that I went into a Black church, the very first question that was asked of me, I go through this whole song and dance of this presentation, and I'm feeling really good. And then the first hand raised said, why should we listen to you? Have you ever heard about the Tuskegee medical trials? And I knew pieces, but I thought, well, I certainly don't know what they know. I certainly don't feel, if that's the first question right out of the gate, I must not know what they know or feel what they feel. And so my response was, tell me about it and tell me how I can help. Because in that moment, we ended up just having a very loving conversation about, I don't know what I don't know, and I don't know what I don't experience. But there has to be a way for us to affect change. And I think part of that change comes from flipping the script, turning the story around, and making sure that as a community of healthcare providers, as a community of people like us, Reisch, with a podcast, that we are talking about what's going wrong in the system and, better yet, how to also fix it. But it starts with that at its core. What are these inequities? And then how do we start turning things around so that people are receiving the healthcare that they deserve? And I'm so excited to introduce our guest today because her work is doing just that.
Amen. Amen. Think Tank of Three starts right now. So much for tuning in to Think Tank of Three podcast alongside my amazing co-host, Julie Holton. I am Reischea Candidate Capasuris.
Our guest today, we are so excited to introduce you to our third on the podcast. Dr. Renee Branch Canady is leading the charge in developing equity within our healthcare system. She is the CEO of the Michigan Public Health Institute, where their goal is advancing population health through public health innovation and collaboration. We're going to have her break down what all of that means and why it's so important. Dr. Canady also just recently released a book that everyone should read. It is called Room at the Table. This book addresses not just the inequities within healthcare, but how to deal with those issues head on, starting with yourself. And I think this will also translate across other industries. She shares her wisdom through her stories on the front lines. It's always great to have that front line experience as an equity public health leader. Dr. Canady, it is awesome to have you with us on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you both so very much. I love even the sound of a think tank of three. We should all be setting these up in our lives. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. And, our intro, Reisch, went a little bit longer than we normally do because I think this is one of those times when everyone needs to get up on their soapbox to talk about this, shout it from the rooftops. And Dr. Canady, I want to just dive right into the deep end because I really think that for some in our audience, that it might actually be a surprise, unfortunately, a surprise to hear that there are inequities in our healthcare system. And I want to actually honor that because I think that there's no shame if you're hearing this for the first time. There is no shame if you don't know. If you heard Tuskegee medical trials and that didn't ring a bell, that's okay. But Google it, learn about it. So I think for half of our audience, I'm making up numbers, but for some in our audience, this is a surprise. They're unaware of this problem. For the other half of our audience, this is something that they are living every day. So can you first paint this picture and set the scene on this work you're doing? Because the CDC said that racism is a public threat to our healthcare. Talk about this. What have you seen in your experience?
Yeah, I appreciate, first of all, thank you for the passion from both of you in your opening. And, we have a narrative in these United States. And let me say, I grew up in a military family. My father was a career serviceman. My brother is a West Point graduate. They both are veterans of war. And so deeply patriotic. I want to make that very clear. But we have some opportunities for growth in our country, right? We have lots of narrative that says, we are created equally, and that this country is about access and availability and fairness and justice. And we say those things so often that many, many people who do not experience the other side of that coin think that we've achieved that. And I'll offer that there are also highly educated, well-employed people of color that believe they've never experienced any injustices. And so there is a bit of a flawed narrative, because when we see the alternative and we see the contradictory outcomes and experiences of people, it does leave many folk aghast, like, well, I thought, well, I never knew. Great. Now that you know better, we're going to do better together. We continue to see patterns of groups of people being disproportionately at risk for negative outcomes, and in their health and in their well-being. And I do appreciate the Centers for Disease Control announcement that they said racism is the threat, not race. Sometimes we'll say that the risk factor is race. No, the risk factor is racism. There's nothing genetically wrong with Reischea or myself because we check the black box. The risk and the problem is the exposures that people of color experience in our lives because we happen to check that box.
It's so interesting because, people really, they sometimes just, they don't, I don't even know how the words for it. It's like they just don't get it. They don't get that at the end of the day, human is human, person is person. Now, I dealt with some doozies when I was in middle school specifically. And I don't know if they were honestly just being jerks or if they were truly ignorant. I'm kind of leaning to the they were really just kind of being jerk side, because I remember one saying, well, like, what color is your blood if you get cut? And I'm like, seriously? Seriously? But there are people do tend to have these random questions about, gosh, I remember, what was I watching? I was watching some report or whatever, and I think someone was saying along the lines of, well, for Black people, they've experienced more pain, so they can handle more pain, and that's why, yeah. And it's stuff like that. It's like, you're not. We need to deal with the issues, the health issues that are happening, not the health issues that are in your mind that you think don't exist because, well, this person is Black, so they're just kind of saying what they're saying. And it's scary because that means someone is completely getting a different healthcare, if at all. And it's mind-boggling because it's 2024. And one of those reasons we have this situation is also because of, and I know it's a completely different subject and I won't veer off that far. I will just say this is where book banning comes in. Because when you are banning education, when you are banning situations, I could very easily say, well, we don't need to talk about the Tuskegee medical trials. That was a horrible time. We don't need to act. When you ignore that stuff, that's why you have situations where you have General Austin saying, I needed to say something and I didn't. And the reason I didn't is because as a Black man, we just don't talk about it.
Well, I like to quote the work of Margaret Whitehead, who describes health disparities as patterned and systemic. And we know that they're patterned and systemic because just like you told a blood story, I can tell, I just recently told the story of being in college doing blood typing and my lab partner, who was a white woman, insisting that I must have done mine wrong because I was B positive. And she said, well, you can't be B positive. Well, why can't I be? She said, because I'm B positive and Black people and white people don't have the same type of blood. Now, is she a flawed human? Absolutely not. She herself is the victim of this narrative, this erroneous narrative that has impacted her belief. We talk about this work at the personal level. What do I know, think, believe? that impacts the work at the interpersonal level, how she interacted with me, how we have interacted with each other. And then it impacts the systemic level, the institutional level, because it's these people with false narratives, flawed narratives, establishing policies,
Yep.
setting up rules and laws that then impact and, dare I say, damage all of us. And it is inherent in the culture of our nation, in the culture of many organizations and institutions. I can give this example that once upon a time in healthcare, when a physician came into the room, if the nurse was seated, she had to stand up. And I say she because they were disproportionately women. That is how all of these beliefs and values shape all of our lived experience. But we know that change happens. We know that nurses don't stand up when physicians walk in the room anymore because we had an epiphany. And we are now in a stage of our history where we're trying to push against narrative so that we can have the epiphany, change the policies, begin to see outcomes and negative health experience change for people.
I love that mention, in changing policies and getting to that bigger picture, that wider scope. I'm curious your thoughts on this. So I was having a conversation with a really good friend of mine. He's a business owner, and he's a Latino background. His the mother of his child is a Black woman, and he described to me being in Atlanta when his daughter was born, and in the room, in the birthing room with his then wife, and the amazing, wonderful experience that they had in this hospital. And he said, but Julie, I looked out the window and I could literally see the next hospital. And I knew that if we had been at that hospital, we would have had a different experience, because the wealth gap, the racial gap, the all of these gaps, as he described, meant very, very different lived experiences in healthcare. Has this been your experience? I mean, tell us about some of these disparities that are happening within the healthcare system.
Yeah, although we like to describe ourselves as a colorblind society, which could be no farther from wrong and no farther from desirable. I want you to see who I am, gender wise, ethnically wise, racially wise, because it brings a richness to our relationship. But we like to pretend like, nope, we're just seeing everyone and we're treating everyone the same, and everyone can have the same health experience. And if they don't, they probably just didn't do what the doctor told them to do. Mm-hmm. In public health, we describe our mission as assuring the conditions needed for good health. So you can have two people with the exact same diagnosis, with the exact same prognosis, the same care plan, and you send them out with the plan to get better, and they have completely different outcomes because the homes to which they go are different. The communities in which they live are different. Their accessibility to the healthy fruits and vegetables that you're telling them as a provider to take advantage of are different. And so even walking in a neighborhood, gun violence is a focus of the Michigan Public Health Institute right now, because I could be saying, yeah, go out, take a walk around the block. Well, that's not safe for many people in their neighborhoods. And so this disparity of choice and context, as well as the way people are treated interpersonally within systems, we know is the source of disparities. Disparities are the result of inequities in systems.
What can we do? I realize that's a very large question. So let's find a bite-sized piece that we can dig into. What is one step that people of color, that people in the medical field, what is one bite that we can take and say, here, let's start here?
Well, I would offer that the first step is what the two of you are doing now. You are beginning a dialogue. I'm not saying a conversation like you'll hear people say, I'm so tired of talking about this. And I will say, super, let's stop talking about it and let's have a targeted dialogue that's going to construct some solutions. The solutions are going to come from us. They're going to come from our shared commitment that this is not acceptable. Margaret Whitehead further describes disparities as inequities as unfair and unjust. So they're systemic and they're patterned, but she also invited values to the table. And that's where we've got to be. We have this, again, myth of our personal self and our professional self, and we separate the two. No, you are who you are as you're doing the things that you're paid to do. And those passions that you have when you think about why are these babies dying at higher rates than others? Why is this mom? Can you believe that childbirth is a threat to the very life of a mother, particularly a mother who is under-resourced or a mother who is Black, and in Michigan, where I live, Native American, we see exorbitant rates, not because of her fault, but because of the system and the patterns. And so I talk a lot of actually in my book about this idea of productive outrage. And so when you say, what is one thing we can do? I want us to allow outrage to drive productive solutions. I'm not suggesting we get outraged and we go tear up things and, I mean, all due respect to our history of rioting in this country. But you can be angry and use that to drive and motivate solutions. And they're not solutions that Renee is going to come up on her own. It's not a solution that Reischea or that Julie are going to, it's in relationship. So how do we set a table where we can just belly up to it and say, all right, we can fix this. And we know we can fix it because we've seen solutions happen.
With admission, right? It's let us admit that this exists and stop trying to, we're not trying to say, you did this to us. It's no, this happened. We need to address it. We need to admit that it happened. And then we need to say, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? How do we then say we can't fix that thing in the past, but we can damn sure fix it and make sure it doesn't move forward ever again. So I guess when you belly up to the table, once again, we get back into facts versus fiction versus alternative facts. If we can all sit at the table and drop facts and agree, these are facts, this is real. Now that we can agree that this actually happened, this thing is real, what was innately wrong beyond racism? Was there ever an effort to try to do something, or was there a laziness here? Or where do we go from here? How do we say, okay, that was ugly. What's our step forward? I don't know. Exactly. Maybe it sounds too simple for me.
Well, and I really love this idea of room at the table. I mean, that really, to me, just the headline alone puts the responsibility on everyone. There is room at the table and we need everyone. We need the right leaders at the table. And Dr. Canady, you talk a lot about health leadership. You introduce this concept that at the surface, I think we hear leadership all the time. And, I think most of us know the qualities that make a good leader. But when you're talking about health leadership in particular, what are some of these concepts through your work that you see are needed in this space? What does health leadership mean?
I think leadership, I agree, Julie. Leadership is leadership. And leaders who happen to find their space and place in a sphere of influence that's going to shape health, particularly now, are needed more than ever. We're at this really interesting nexus where if we continue to do things the same, we'll continue to see negative outcomes. We've kind of gotten at a place where, well, good enough is good enough. I think socially, sometimes people feel like, well, we all go to the same restaurants now, and there's not whites and colored signs. So we've arrived. Well, we've made progress, but we've not arrived. And good enough is absolutely not good enough. So what is our responsibility, right? We are not maybe being hosed, with the fire hoses and attacked by police dogs, and the risk of lynching prayerfully is diminished. But we've not done the work. Our ancestors and I won't even say our ancestors, our grandparents, who we know, knew, and love, got us to a certain point, and then we sat down. And so for me, leadership is about recognizing that change is needed. Change can happen, and it'll only happen if you and I take the initiative. But it's scary. Like, nobody wants to be called a racist. Nobody wants to be called homophobic, and none of these derogatory terms. And so we have found ourselves just sitting quietly and doing nothing. But being willing to do it afraid, to take the risk, to be the person to say, excuse me, but have we thought about? And much of that, I would submit, comes again across relationship. I describe myself as a relationship-driven leader. I battle racism because it damages relationships. And we need relationships to assure conditions to make sure everyone's health is as good and as strong as it can be. And it is relationship across difference. I need to have people at the table that have different lived experiences, different worldviews, different priorities, because that's when we innovate and create something that's new. Doing more of the same just gets us more of the same.
What is it that they say? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is called insanity. So if you keep
foreheads from just beating your head against the wall.
It's like you keep banging your head up against the wall isn't going to necessarily break, but at some point you might get knocked out.
Yeah.
The amount of patience that is required in dealing with something of this level, because you even reach back to Dr. King, to Malcolm X, and one of the biggest issues was the slowness to which change happens. And what is it that Dr. King said? The arc of justice it's not a straight line. So when you're looking at something like this and it's 2024 and we're still dealing with some of the same and in some cases it feels like we are literally going backwards, especially when we're talking about women's health. How much patience can you have, or how do you, it's like, yeah, I want to sit up at the table, but that outrage that I do want to go break something. I want to go break Congress. So what now? What is that next thing? How do you hold your own mind together and realize, okay, we're sitting 50 years ago again for some strange reason, and it's 2024, but we still are trying to make progress. I guess my question's a little convoluted. And just how much patience do you have to have with this for yourself, for this fight that just seems like it's getting tougher, and it shouldn't be at this point?
And how do you renew that patience when you're tired? Because you must get tired. I get tired. I'm tired for you.
Well, I mean, it is a teamwork. It is a think tank of 3+, right? So that on the day where I'm like, I just can't. I just can't. Or, something happened that pinged me very personally and very intimately. For example, the maternal child health work this last summer, when everyone was talking about RSV, I hate to use the word triggering because I'm not a psychologist, but it was very, I was very reactive to it, because my son, who in 1989, when we had the tragic experience of contributing to the infant mortality statistics, my son, who was delivered at 28 weeks, was doing well. But when we hit wintertime, in 1989 in December, he caught RSV and his little preemie lungs just couldn't handle it. So how can I take that lived experience to honor this beautiful son that lived with us for 6 months to say, I'm going to drive change. I am impatient about it. And I encourage people to use that impatience. You know, I'm a bit of an incrementalist in philosophy. I think small bites are lasting. But as of late, that impatience has kicked in, and I'm a bit more now of a rapid incrementalist. And if you just envision baby steps, I don't know if you have toddlers in your lives, but try chasing a toddler when they are trying to get away from you. We can accomplish things really quickly with small bites that are going to be consistent and are going to be staying. I'll just give you an example. In Michigan, when COVID was in the throes, our governor established a coronavirus task force, but the task force was focused on racial disparities. So it was the coronavirus racial disparities task force. And we were very focused on this disproportionate curve where Blacks were way more experiencing the negative consequences. And how could we, our language was flatten the curve. Well, in Michigan, we actually did flatten the racial disparity curve during COVID. And it was because we got in community and we talked to folk. You know, we oftentimes, with all our experience in education and degrees and positions, will say, oh, we know what's best. We think we should do this. But instead, we entered this space with a deep humility to say, how can we leverage, how would you like us, community, to leverage our resources and our knowledge? And they said, well, first of all, I don't have a car. Can you bring the clinic to us? And we stood up a mobile clinic that was driving around, talking to people, providing education, providing resources. People were telling us, we're hungry. We set up accessible spaces where people could access food and well-being. Because when you tell people to quarantine, quarantining looks very different if you're living in a wealthy suburb with 7 rooms and 5 bathrooms than when you're a multi-generational family living in a 2-bedroom house. We said these things and just assumed people could do it. So in our work against the coronavirus, we didn't just make assumptions. And so we know that change can happen because, as I said, the curve flattened, but what it took to get there, we have to continue. There's a level of vigilance. This is not in healthcare, it's not check the box work. If we don't continue to say, no, pain scales are not racially determined, so you shouldn't under-medicate a child with a compound fracture because they happen to be Black. They are hurting as much as the white child with a compound fracture. It's disengaging amongst all of the myths that we have floated out as facts. We know that it can happen. We know that we can do it. It's a matter of our holding ourselves accountable in spaces like this. So we talk at MPHI about facilitated dialogue as a methodology, because sometimes we get at the table and we're like, what are we going to talk about? And I don't know. And how do you do a dialogue? Well, there is a methodology. There are actions, there are steps to get to a place of solution. And so, yes, talking is doing, dialogue is action.
Isn't that amazing what happens when you listen to someone? You know?
Yeah.
And as you said, that dialogue that's targeted. You know, we're not just out there talking. A lot of people are on social media just talking, but it's not targeted and it's not actionable. And you mentioned MPHI, so I want to make sure that we mention for our audience the Michigan Public Health Institute, Michigan-based, and the work that you're doing. How can people learn about MHPI and MPHI? Did I say that right? Michigan Public Health Institute. How can people learn about the work you're doing and even get involved if they're in Michigan?
Yeah, certainly. We are Michigan based, but we're nationally engaged. We're one of almost 50 public health institutes across the country. And so public health institutes are sort of this intermediate partner between sort of academic public health, governmental public health, community-based public health, where we bring some backbone and some capacity to spaces where people, like in governmental public health, are just swamped. And they just need somebody on the bench to help them get this done. Or in communities that simply may not have the knowledge or the ability, we can bring that in. And so I'm really, really honored as someone who's been a career public health professional, having worked in academics, having worked in state and local county governments, having worked in community. Michigan Public Health Institute is a nice integration of all of those things for me. And so recognizing that this, the solution doesn't sit in any one sector. Right. And I would offer, I know there's a quote that says, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, when you're a public health professional, everything looks like public health. If it is education, education is deeply correlated to well-being and health. Violence, deeply, employment, deeply, all of the things that we talk about, it's not about, it is about our well-being. And what does it mean to live well? And certainly our physical, our emotional, our mental health is a deep part of that. And it requires all of those sectors to set that as a priority.
It's a web. It's an intertwined web with so many pieces. And people they want to have a simple answer, and that doesn't exist because we're talking about human beings and we're talking about individuals that all feel, experience, whatever things differently. But if you want to have a simple answer, then your first simple answer is recognize that everybody is human. Let's start there and recognize that everybody's different and that's fine. That's going back to what you said before. The term of we want to be colorblind, when you had mentioned that before, I remember saying, no, I don't want to be colorblind. I love that I'm Black. I said, but I do want to be, I love what makes me different. I look at my beautiful Julie and her little face, and I want to reach through the screen every day and hug her. I love the differences between the two of us. It's what makes us us. She's her, I am me, and that's perfectly fine. She's white and I'm Black, and that's great. But let's acknowledge, let's start there, and then you can start weaving into everything else. But going back to what you, Dr. Canady, and even Julie, what you said at the church, when you engage and listen versus I'm going to tell you what you need to know and what you need to hear, as opposed to, you know what? You need to tell me what you're experiencing, what's going on, and what you need to make it better. And we start there. And I think that I'm ready for some big bites.
Well, can I just grab on to that bite of difference? Because, you know, we've gone through different stages where we have mantras like, oh, value diversity. But diversity simply means different. And all too often, difference comes for us with discomfort because we're not used to difference. Right. But the more you're exposed to difference, the more you appreciate it and you value it. So difference is good. Another way difference kind of gets in the way of progress in this space is we've bought into the mantra that fairness means sameness. And so if you're not treating everyone the same, you'll hear this often in medical clinical spaces. Oh, I treat all my patients the same. And I want to say, shame on you, because all of your patients are not the same. They're different. And so we have to give ourselves permission to treat each other differently. Not because, and some of it, I think it comes from the, treat everyone the same, but no, that is flawed. It's absolutely flawed.
It's again, looking for that simple answer for something that is more complex. Yes. Treat everybody, treat everybody the same with regards to respect of person, respect of hearing, but their ailment, their issue, what they are dealing with, their familial history is different from Susie Wu's familial history. And you can't treat them both the same when they are coming from different backgrounds and different situations. So we could go on and on. I mean, good grief, we could, you don't even get me started on the other. I'm like seeing all these other little branches of conversation where this goes. So we definitely want to talk to you again in the future. But before we wrap this up, we absolutely have our rapid fire questions for you. And this is just simple, right off the top of your head questions, nothing too scary, nothing too hard, but just right to the point. Are you ready?
Yes, ready.
All right. Question number 1. What advice would you give to an aspiring young leader?
I would say the lift is heavy, but the lift is worth it.
Is there a quote? You've shared a few quotes. Is there one quote, a book, a resource maybe that you can point to that has had an impact on your journey?
So many. I absolutely love quotes. My favorite quote comes from someone I consider a mentor, Dr. Ron David, who is a physician and a theologian. And he says, relationships are primary. All else is derivative.
Nice, nice. What would you tell your younger self if they were willing to listen?
I would tell my younger self, take more risks and take them sooner. I see too many experienced leaders who don't want to take risks. As a matter of fact, that was one of the motivations for writing my book. I just got tired of seeing leaders with amazing platforms that were just sitting on their hands and, well, I mean, I don't want to cause any, please cause it. So I would tell younger Renee, take more risks and take them sooner.
Good
And
trouble.
I will add to that, Dr. Canady, because I think that is so beautiful. And I just, as the white woman in the trio today, I just want to share a message from the heart with other white folks who are listening to this. The conversation is difficult. It can be uncomfortable. I can tell you when I was that younger version of me standing in that Black church and I felt that all the focus on me and saying, well, why should we listen to you? In that moment, I did not want to be there, that I did not know how to answer. It was so far out of my comfort zone, but I'm also so much better for standing there and listening. And thank God I said the right words. Thank goodness I listened. And so my message is the conversations are uncomfortable. So go into them and listen. Just show up. Just pull a chair and sit at the table and be a part of the change, because we know change is needed. And if we don't sit through the discomfort, if we don't hear what's actually happening, if we don't face this, then we can't be a part of fixing it. And so I share that, hopefully, for whatever it's worth. I am by no means, Reish, this, there are so many times that I misspeak on this podcast and I think later like, oh my gosh, people are going to think I'm just this awful person because I said the wrong thing and I didn't even know I was saying the wrong thing. But you know what? If all we do is we show up as the best version of ourselves with the best of intentions, that's it. That's all we have to do. That is the first step. Start showing up, start listening, start engaging in these conversations.
We've said it time and time again. Yes, like you said, I'm just going to reiterate what you just said. Yeah, the conversation might be difficult. It's supposed to be. It's supposed to be difficult. If it's an easy conversation, then you're probably not actually having the conversation. So have that difficult conversation here. Don't just wait. Don't sit there and say, well, I feel like I'm being attacked. It's not about being attacked. It's about hearing what's going on and then digesting it and then saying, okay, I hear you now. And then once you hear it and then understand and try to understand, then we can make positive change, because now you're no longer in defense mode. Now you're in fix mode because you heard it. It makes sense now. I didn't think of it that way. I understand it now. Okay, now what steps can I do to get into fix mode? And that's when that real change happens. So go have the difficult conversation.
And the magic ingredient, I think, is grace. We just have to give each other some
Yes.
grace. And it gets easier. It gets more comfortable. It's a little bit like jumping into the pool. You put your toe in and it's freezing cold. And, by the time you're all in the pool, you don't remember that it was ever felt cold. So it's a little bit, just give each other some grace and dive in.
Oh, it's been wonderful having you on the show. Thank you so much, Dr. Canady. And that's going to do it for this episode of Think Tank of Three.